Her family left her stranded in a blizzard. No apologies, no second thought. Jan Cutler didn't just wait. By the time they realized she was gone, she owned the gas station, the land, the house, everything they thought they'd claimed, and when they showed up at her door, it wasn't forgiveness they found. It was final. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The red taillights blinked once, twice, then disappeared into the curtain of snow like dying embers in a cold wind. Jan Cutler tightened her scarf around her neck with stiff, gloved fingers, breath steaming in sharp bursts. The Montana wind knifed through her winter coat, as if she weren't wearing one at all. Powdery snow swirled in frantic circles around her boots, already half buried. Behind her, the gas station's windows glowed faint yellow, but no one inside seemed to notice her. They just went to grab cough drops, she muttered to herself, scanning the lot again. Empty, no headlights, no sound but the wind howling across the highway and the occasional groan of the station's flickering sign. The worst part wasn't the cold. It was the stillness, the kind that made you question if you'd misremembered something entirely. They had pulled off 10 minutes outside Bozeman. Melanie had said she was starting to feel sick, wanted something for her throat. Connor had muttered something about using the bathroom and checking tire pressure. Jan, already cramped from the back seat, had stepped out to stretch her legs. Then the car doors slammed shut in unison. "We'll be back in 5, Melanie had said, without meeting her eyes. That was an hour and 10 minutes ago. Jan checked her phone. No signal. Of course. She glanced back toward the building. A kid with earbuds in stood behind the counter, head bobbing slightly, unaware, or uncaring. She didn't feel like explaining herself. 73 years old, and somehow she still hated the sting of embarrassment more than frostbite. She tried walking in place, clenching her fists in her coat pockets to force blood back into her fingertips. Her knees ached, hips too. The wind picked up again, catching the edge of her coat, and tugging like a bratty child. And still no car. A voice, low and gravelly, spoke behind her. "Ma'am, you okay out here?" She turned. A man in a flannel coat stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a red rag. Rudy. She recognized him vaguely from past Phillips station manager, maybe owner once, back when this place had working lights and cleaner bathroom. Jan swallowed hard. "I think my ride left me." Rudy's brow furrowed. "You sure?" "No," she said quietly, "but I'm not wrong either." He stepped aside. "Come on in. Ain't no sense freezing for people who don't come back." The heat inside hit her like a punch. Her face stung from the sudden temperature shift. Rudy guided her to a stool near a space heater in the corner and handed her a styrofoam cup of weak, watery coffee. Jan wrapped her hands around it like it was holy. Minutes passed in silence. Then her phone buzzed. One bar. "Zoe, Grandma?" Her voice crackled, half static. "Where are you? Dad said you wanted to wait outside." Jan's mouth went dry. "Zoe, they left." "Grandma? They came back and said you insisted on staying for the air pump." "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know, honey," Jan whispered. Her throat tightened. "It's okay." Rudy raised a brow. She gave a slight shake of her head. He didn't press. After the call, Jan sat there another 10 minutes before asking Rudy if he could help her call a taxi. "I'll get one that doesn't ask too many questions," he said. And he did. The driver didn't talk much. Jan watched the snowfall blur past the window as the car took the winding road back to her log cabin-style house, tucked between a frozen creek and a stand of whispering pines. She didn't shed a tear. Not one. Her hands stayed clenched in her lap, thumbs rubbing a slow circle against the calluses on her palms. Inside her house, everything was as she'd left it, neat, quiet, and colder than it should have been. She hung up her coat, still half frozen, and walked to the small closet beneath the stairs, opened the box marked deeds in black marker, pulled out a cracked leather folder that hadn't seen daylight in years. Her fingers hesitated, hovering over old survey maps and title records. Then she flipped to a specific page, one yellowed with age but clear in its meaning. The land directly behind that gas station, a long-forgotten inheritance, and a line scribbled in the margin by her late husband, option to purchase, expires 2030. Her breath steadied, her spine straightened. From outside, wind clawed at the windows. But inside, something in her had gone still. The paper trembled in Jeanne's hands, not from cold, but from memory. The deed's corners had curled with time, but the ink was bold, unapologetic. Parcel hash 441B, a sliver of land behind the gas station, registered in the names of Janice Cutler and Thomas Cutler, 1983. Scrawled beneath it in Tom's faded handwriting, option to purchase full tract by 2030, preserve rights. Jeanne sat at the kitchen table, dawn breaking cold and pale through the frost-bitten window. Her coffee had gone untouched. Outside, a pair of deer picked their way through the snow-covered brush near the tree line, moving with more caution than she'd shown just days before. She stared at the documents again. They'd left her in that storm like she was disposable. But this land said otherwise. It whispered of leverage. She picked up her phone, dialed the number etched into her mind like a scar. 3 rings. Kira Tran, came the clipped but alert voice on the other end. Jeanne didn't waste time. I have land. Behind the station. A pause. Then the click of a keyboard. That part of 441B? Kira asked, curiosity already tightening her tone. Wait. That's adjacent to the petroleum lot. It's mine. Tom left it to me. And there's an option clause. Valid. You want to talk sale or strategy? Kira's voice sharpened. Leverage, Jeanne said simply. Let's talk leverage. Within an hour, Kira had a private title report in hand, and a follow-up email that made Jeanne blink. Current owner, George L. Becker, age 82, not renewing franchise lease. Status open to direct sale. Quiet buyer preferred. He's done with it, Kira said over speakerphone. Says he'd rather sell to a real human than a chain. Jeanne's lips curved, just slightly. Then let's keep it human. Later that day, snow flurries started up again, dusting the cabin roof in white velvet. The air smelled faintly of cedar and distant smoke. Zoe arrived after school, stomping snow off her boots, her cheeks flushed and red beneath her hoodie. Jan opened the door before she could knock. Are you okay? Zoe asked instantly, shrugging out of her coat. They're acting like it didn't happen. Jan turned back toward the living room, papers stacked neatly on the coffee table. I know. They said you were tired and didn't want to go with them, that you wandered off. Jan didn't look up. Let them keep their story. I've got mine. Zoe blinked. You're not mad? I'm working, Jan said softly. They'll feel it later. They sat in silence for a beat. The ticking of the old mantel clock filled the room like a drum. You don't deserve this, Zoe said at last, voice tight. I see how they treat you. Jan finally looked at her. Then make sure you never treat someone like that, Zoe. That'll be enough for me. Zoe nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, and leaned her head against Jan's shoulder. When Zoe left, the house sank back into quiet. Just past dusk, Jan heard a faint knock, 3 short taps at the side door, the one that faced the woods. Rudy stood on the steps, snow dusting his shoulders, holding a folded note in his cracked hands. He passed it to her without a word. She unfolded it. He's ready to sell. Says he remembers Tom, and he trusts you more than he ever trusted them. Jan didn't respond right away. She looked past Rudy toward the horizon where the station lights shimmered faintly through the trees, glowing like embers under the frost-heavy sky. She remembered Tom hauling lumber past those lots, fixing fences on Saturdays, always saying, "Land's only useless until it isn't." It wasn't useless anymore. She turned back toward the warmth of the house, but her voice was steel. Tell him I'll come see him in the morning. And I'm not bringing a chain. The warmth inside George Becker's kitchen had a heaviness to it, like time had settled there and never moved on. Jan kept her gloves folded in her lap, back straight against the vinyl chair. The scent of burnt toast and old coffee clung to the air, while a yellowed calendar beside the fridge still read October. They sat across from each other at a table scarred with knife marks and heat rings, neither in a hurry to speak first. George finally broke the silence. Didn't think anyone even remembered that land still meant something. I never forgot, Jan said. Her voice was low, steady. Especially not after last week. George nodded, slow and knowing, his face a collection of folded lines and sharp wisdom. Heard about that. Rudy said they left you standing out front in the wind like a damn scarecrow. They said it was temporary. Jan smiled, though there was no softness in it. I decided to make something else permanent. She slid a folder across the table. The offer was handwritten, not just signed. She wanted it to feel human. Inside, a full-price bid, no contingencies, with a stipulation that Rudy would remain employed with full autonomy and wage increases. The LLC name was generic enough not to raise suspicion. Cold Ridge Holdings. George thumbed through the papers without speaking. His thick glasses slid slightly down the bridge of his nose. He flipped to the final page and read the terms again. You could have underbid, he said. Hell, you could have waited me out. Jan sipped her tea, now lukewarm. I'm not interested in cheap. I'm interested in clean. George nodded, satisfied. Better you than a chain. They wanted to tear it down, build one of those all-glass stations with a robot barista. He chuckled. Bet they never stood outside and pumped gas in a blizzard. Jan's smile returned barely. Bet they never had to choose between kerosene and groceries. He signed, no hesitation. Then he reached across and clasped her hand with his leathery fingers, warm from age and earned trust. Tom'd be proud. He used to talk about this place like it was part of your family. Her throat tightened. It still is. By that evening, Kira had the paperwork moving faster than snow off a shovel during thaw. The contract closed under a privacy shield. No media, no fanfare. Just initials, deadlines, and a slow, unstoppable shift in control. The next morning, Jan stood at the edge of the station lot, watching Rudy change out the broken LED sign. He gave her a small nod from atop the ladder, as he swapped the cracked plastic panel for a new one. Locally owned. That's all it said. No names, just truth. Inside the store, she'd made only one request. Clean the windows, keep the free coffee for veterans, and hang up the framed photo of the Cutlers from the early days, when she and Tom used to gas up their old Ford on Saturday mornings. Rudy had kept the picture in the back room for years. Now it hung above the door, sunlight catching the edges. Jan didn't post about the purchase, didn't call anyone, but that night, she saw Melanie's photos pop up on Zoe's social feed anyway. Sunny skies, palm trees, hotel robes, and a smug caption. Finally got the R&R we deserve #family first #Montana. Can wait. Jan watched the screen with a stillness that bordered on surgical. The smell of cedar from the fire behind her filled the room, but she barely blinked. One by one she scrolled through the smiling images. Connor by the pool, Melanie in oversized sunglasses, a martini in hand. None of them mentioned her. None of them even looked like they remembered Bozeman, still had a winter. The next morning, the snow came in heavy, blanketing the cabin porch in white silence. Jan lit the fireplace early and brewed strong coffee. She had no appointment, no errands, just peace, until she heard the crunch of tires on ice outside. A familiar truck pulled into her driveway, mud-caked, dented on one side. She didn't move to the window. She didn't need to. A moment later, a knock on the door. Then it opened without waiting. Connor stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat like nothing had ever happened. "Hey Ma," he said cheerfully, holding a grocery bag. "Brought you a few things, figured you might be running low." The door creaked open on a gust of dry wind and the scent of road salt. Jan stood in the archway between kitchen and den, a tea towel slung over one shoulder. Connor stepped inside with a paper grocery bag in hand, the smile on his face so forced it felt laminated. "Brought you a few things," he said casually, shaking snow off his boots. "Some stew meat, carrots, that sourdough you like." Jan didn't answer right away. She watched him set the bag down like a man entering neutral territory. his movements slow, deliberate, eyes scanning for signs of a trap. The last time he'd walked into this house, she'd been his afterthought. Now he looked at the walls like he wasn't sure what had changed, but sensed something had. I put on a kettle, Jan said quietly. Still drink chamomile, or has Melanie banned it? Connor smirked like he didn't hear the barb, but Jan saw the way his jaw twitched. Still do, he said, removing his coat and glancing toward the hearth. Place looks the same. No need to fix what isn't broken. They sat at the kitchen table a few minutes later. Steam rose from mismatched mugs. The house was still too still. The kind of quiet that makes people nervous when they know they've done wrong. Connor blew on his tea, avoiding her eyes. So you been okay? Jan just tilted her head slightly. I've kept warm. He chuckled. Short, awkward. He chuckled. Short, awkward. Mel and I were talking the other night about the land near the station. That back lot. Jan's eyes didn't waver. What about it? You ever think about selling it? He asked. Too casual. I mean, property values out there are getting interesting, especially with the chain developments moving in. She stirred her tea slowly. No, but I think about what it's worth. Connor's smile faltered. Right. Yeah, I mean, same thing. Jan took a sip. Not really. He shifted in his chair, the silence pressing down like snowfall on a weak roof. You know, I've been looking into investment stuff lately. Property management, portfolio building. You taught me how to be responsible. Figure it's time I did something with it. Jan nodded faintly, eyes unreadable. You always were good at building portfolios. Just not always with your own assets. Connor looked up. What's that supposed to mean? She let the question hang, unanswered, and stood to refill the kettle. Her back turned to him. Her voice softened just enough to sound like velvet over a blade. How's Melanie? She asked. Still detoxing from the trip. Connor scoffed, trying to recover his charm. Yeah, she's always got one foot in vacation mode. Can't say I blame her. Jan didn't respond. The kettle whistled low, like a warning coming from the belly of the house. He didn't stay long after that. Later that night, the cabin glowed with amber light from the fireplace. The snow outside turned slick and reflective, mirroring the low haze of winter moonlight. Jan sat on the couch with a heavy quilt across her lap, flipping through her old field journal from the nursing days, half memory, half armor. Her phone buzzed. Zoe. Screenshot. Melanie's name in the message preview. Can you keep her busy Sunday? Like a long lunch or something? Jan didn't respond to Zoe. She simply saved the image and opened her encrypted chat with Kira. Forwarded message from Melanie Cutler. Subject: Sunday distraction. She didn't add a caption. None was needed. Her phone buzzed again less than 2 minutes later. Kira Tran. Got it. Paperwork's ready. Title agent on standby. You ready to close? Jan leaned back against the armrest, her eyes glinting in the firelight. She whispered, to no one in particular. I was ready the second they drove away. Jan's pen didn't tremble. The conference room was warm, overly so, the kind of stale heat that clung to your skin and dried out your mouth. Still, her grip on the pen was steady, her posture perfectly upright. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the faint scent of toner drifted from the nearby printer. The closing agent smiled politely but stayed quiet. Kira sat at the far end of the sleek glass table, chin raised, calm, efficient. A manila folder lay open in front of Jan, page after page of irrevocable ownership. One final signature. With the practiced fluidity of a woman who had signed 1,000 intake forms in emergency tense across 2 wars, Jan pressed ink to paper and closed the folder. Well, Kira said, standing and extending her hand, you now own the station, the lot, the back access road, and the unused parcel behind the billboard. Jan met her handshake with a small, cool smile. Not bad for someone who was left behind in a parking lot. Kira gave a half smirk. Cold makes people think clear, or cruel. Jan adjusted her scarf as she rose. I've been trained to survive both. By noon, Rudy had the rehiring papers signed and tucked into his back pocket. He stood beside Jan in the winter sun, sleeves rolled, cheeks red from wind, eyes gleaming like a man who just won the lottery, only quieter about it. I'm not changing much, Jan told him, watching the snowfall layer gently over the gas station's old roof. But you'll get your Sundays off, and no more paychecks that bounce. Rudy gave a slow nod. You want your name up? Not yet, she said. Let's keep it quiet a little longer. She handed him the replacement signage, matte metal, clean lines, no frills, locally owned. He installed it that afternoon, wiping the smudges off with a worn flannel before stepping back and admiring it. No one in town noticed, not yet, but Jan knew it was just a matter of time. Real shifts didn't start with trumpets. They started with silence and a signature. Back at the cabin that night, Jan sat with a cup of black tea, the steam fogging the bottom corner of her glasses as she scrolled her phone with one thumb. Melanie had posted again, another filtered photo from their weekend away. Bozeman needs more modern energy. #growth mindset #level up. The background was a high-end spa lobby, somewhere warm and polished, a world away from the salt-crusted tires and slushy gravel back home. Jan didn't react. She simply bookmarked the post. By morning Connor was on the phone. Zoe overheard it from the stairs while tying her boots. I'm telling you, the neighborhood's going to explode in value, especially once those old parcels behind the station get bought up. It's about timing and leverage. Jan, standing at the sink, didn't turn around. You hear that? She asked Zoe, her voice light. Zoe smirked, stuffing her gloves in her jacket pocket. Yeah, he's feeling real proud. Connor hadn't yet realized the land he was trying to build dreams on already belonged to the woman he'd iced out in a snowstorm. But Jan didn't correct him. Let him make calls. Let him pitch big dreams on borrowed assumptions. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching someone stand confidently on ground they didn't know had already shifted. Later that day, Jan got an alert from the real estate app she used to monitor rural listings. It pinged with an unmistakable location. New listing 4BR2.5BA, Quartzwood subdivision. Price to sell. She stared at the address. It was their house. Connor and Melanie's, the one Jan had watched them run to after leaving her behind like a suitcase at the curb. The post boasted sun-drenched backyard, recent upgrades, and motivated sellers ready to level up. She stared for a long moment, then tapped the listing, enlarging the photos. White cabinets she'd helped pick. Tile backsplash she'd once grouted with her own hands while babysitting Zoe. A porch she'd swept just last spring before they accidentally locked her out for the night. They were trying to sell it, trying to trade up, trying to leave behind the scene of their betrayal for something shinier, fresher, farther from the roots they thought no longer mattered. Jan set down her tea, her reflection caught in the dark window glass, a woman steady, sharp, and newly dangerous. She didn't blink. Then she opened her messaging app and typed 4 words to Kira. Let's buy their house. It only took Kira 10 minutes to find it. Jan sat across from her in the law office's back meeting room, boots wet with slush and hair still damp from the snow. Kira's fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes narrowing at the screen. They've already lined up a move-in, Kira said. New construction, West Side, Mountain Ridge Estates, 5 beds, open concept, triple garage. Jan didn't blink. Can we make a cash offer? Kira looked up. Under your name or the LLC, make it clean. Cold Ridge Holdings, no fingerprints. The listing had just gone live the night before. The sellers were a young couple looking to relocate quickly. One of them had just taken a job in Idaho. They were asking high, but not unreasonable for the neighborhood. Offer 10 over asking. Jan said, no contingencies, no showings, just paperwork. Kira smiled. You really want this house? Jan reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photo, an old Christmas snapshot of Zoe sitting on those very porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, grinning like she had the whole world in her lap. Jan didn't smile. She just tapped the photo once. I want that moment back. Or at least the piece of land where it happened. By that afternoon, the sellers had accepted. The buyer, Cold Ridge Holdings, was local, quick, and generous. They were over the moon. Kira reported in a voice message. Said they'd cancel all other walkthroughs. But one walkthrough remained on the calendar. Connor and Melanie, just waiting on final walkthrough and keys. Connor beamed in a video Zoe overheard him filming. This is it. Our next level. We're talking radiant floors, smart home wiring, room for expansion. Melanie's voice chimed in from off-camera. We can host real events here. Zoe forwarded the clip to Jan, followed by a single emoji. Jan didn't reply. She didn't need to. She scheduled her own walkthrough for one day earlier. Quiet. Private. The realtor never asked questions, especially when the buyer paid above asking and came armed with attorney documentation. Jan moved through the home slowly, breathing in the sterile scent of drywall dust and pine-scented cleaner. Everything was new but not warm. It was a shell of comfort, not the core of it. Still, she moved room to room like a surgeon dissecting intention, memory, false dreams. In the kitchen she paused. Granite countertops, oversized island, a built-in wine fridge. Connor once swore they'd never waste money on. She ran her hand along the surface slowly, then tapped the base. Solid. Hollow underneath. That night, Rudy delivered a wicker basket wrapped in cellophane, wine, crackers, a card, and something extra concealed beneath the fake grass, a microcam nestled inside a mint tin. You sure you want this? Rudy asked quietly, as she handed him the spare key. I'm not recording to expose, Jan said, sliding her coat on. I just want to see how it feels, to watch them walk into something they thought was theirs. He nodded. Well, it'll be yours either way. The next morning, a light snow covered the Mountain Ridge Estates driveway. Jan arrived early, let herself in, and turned on the lights one by one. The house hummed to life, heat kicking in, the quiet whirl of modern insulation. She brewed coffee in the pristine kitchen, using the demo model drip machine left by staging. When the knock came, she didn't answer. She waited. The front door creaked open. Connor's voice echoed through the hall. Oh wow, smells like they already cleaned everything. Then Melanie's heels clicked across the hardwood. Kitchen's massive. I told you this was our space. They turned the corner and froze. Jan sat at the island, one hand wrapped around a steaming mug. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She simply looked up, eyes sharp as winter glass. For one heartbeat, the house was silent. Too silent for how loud the moment actually was. Connor stood frozen by the foyer, his keys still dangling from his hand. Melanie hadn't moved, her manicured fingers hovering inches above the countertop, like she'd touched a flame, and wasn't sure yet if it had burned her. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, but it was overpowered by something rawer: threat, betrayal, disbelief. What are you doing here? Melanie said finally, her voice brittle as thin ice. Jan didn't answer right away. She set her mug down gently, the ceramic clinking softly against the stone counter. Then she turned fully toward them, reached down, and placed a slim leather folder onto the center of the kitchen island, like a dealer laying down a royal flush. Connor took a step forward. That's not possible. Jan smiled, just slightly. It wasn't cruel. It was certain. It's legal. Melanie shook her head. You don't live here. I don't, Jan said calmly. But my LLC does. Cold Ridge Holdings. We closed 3 days ago. The paperwork's at the title office. You can go ask for it by name. She flipped the folder open, revealing the signed deed, transfer confirmation, and stamped record from the county clerk. Melanie's eyes scanned the lines, her lips parting as she recognized the address printed in bold at the top. Connor's voice cracked. You bought it? This house? Jan leaned in, voice lower, colder. You left me at a gas station and ran straight to this house. Now I own both. Melanie's laugh was sharp, almost panicked. There's no way this was our future. Jan raised an eyebrow. You bought a dream with arrogance. I paid cash. Connor looked down at the documents, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find a sentence that would obey him. His face flushed with a fury that had no target, only shame. You did this out of spite, Melanie hissed, stepping closer. You were just waiting for a reason to stick it to us. Jan didn't blink. I waited for nothing. You gave me every reason. She let the weight of her words settle like snow on a silent field. Outside, the wind whistled faintly through the double-paned windows, muffling the world beyond. Why didn't you say anything? Connor asked, barely audible now. Jan looked at him long and hard. Because if I had, you would have tried to take it from me, like everything else. Melanie's eyes burned. This was supposed to be our fresh start. And now it is, Jan said, voice steady. Just not for you. They stood there, caught in the center of a kitchen they'd never really owned, their fantasies slipping through their fingers faster than they could argue it back into place. Then Melanie lunged. She reached across the aisle and hand flying toward the folder like ripping it from sight would undo the past 3 days. Her face twisted, not rage, not even desperation, entitlement. But before she could touch the paper, another hand grabbed her wrist. Zoe. She had stepped into the room without a word, boots tracking a line of snow melt across the polished floor. Her grip was firm, and her eyes locked on Melanie with a calm that didn't belong to a teenager. Don't, Zoe said softly. It's done. Melanie yanked her arm back, face flushed. You don't know what she's doing. I know exactly what she's doing, Zoe replied. She's doing what you never expected, standing up. You think this is over? Connor snapped, pacing across the kitchen tile like a caged dog, every footfall sharp against the silence. Jan stayed seated at the island, hands folded neatly in her lap, her tea growing cold beside her. Zoe stood just behind her, arms crossed, unwavering. Where's your lawyer? Connor spat. I want her name, number. I'll talk to her myself. Jan reached slowly into her coat pocket, pulled out a white card, and slid it across the island. The thick embossed lettering caught the morning light. Kira Tran, Esquire. Real Estate Vertical Bar Trust, and Asset Law Vertical Bar Montana Bar. Connor snatched it, squinted at it like he expected it to disappear, then stuffed it in his coat with a muttered curse. Melanie hadn't moved from the far end of the room. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to steady them around the strap of her purse. This is harassment, she said, lifting her chin. We had every intention to buy this house. You blindsided us. You embarrassed us. I could sue. Jan's brow ticked upward. For being embarrassed in a home you never legally owned? For emotional distress, Melanie snapped. Jan rose, slowly, calmly. Then sue me. But I suggest you first look up who the court sides with when the paperwork is clean. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Within 24 hours, Kira issued formal notices to both Connor and Melanie, trespass warnings for the Mountain Ridge property and the gas station lot, served legally. Stamped and delivered by courier. By week's end, the story began to swirl. Not online. Bozeman didn't work like that. It started at the diner, over coffee and chicken fried steak, then at the post office, the library, the snow removal depot, whispers like flurries building adrift. That's the station lady who turned the tables. You hear what she did to her own son? Bought their dream house right out from under him. She owns the land they wanted, and the one they left her on. Zoe moved her things into Jan's cabin the next morning, 2 suitcases, a bin of books, and a parka too thin for the winter ahead. You sure? Jan asked, not looking up from the stew she was stirring on the stove. Zoe set the final box down by the couch and said, I'd rather shovel snow with someone honest than tan in someone else's lie. Jan didn't smile, but she ladled 2 bowls and set them on the table with quiet satisfaction. Meanwhile, Connor's sale imploded. Their old house didn't pass inspection. Rotting pipes, poor insulation, unresolved liens. Melanie never disclosed in the paperwork. The buyer pulled out. Melanie blamed the inspector. Connor blamed bad timing. Jan never said a word. She let the silence speak instead, and the silence was louder than either of them. By the time Rudy rehung the front display at the gas station, new hand-carved shelves, local maps, fresh coffee refills for drivers, he didn't bother hiding the smirk when folks asked who was backing the upgrades. Same woman who used to come here for diesel in a pickup older than your marriage license, he told a customer, chuckling. She's not leaving this time. Even the high schoolers started using her name in jokes, in awe. Don't mess with Cutler's Corner, they said, or she'll buy your house and sell it back to you for twice the price. Jan didn't ask for attention, but power, it turns out, didn't need a microphone. It just needed receipts. One evening, as the snow tapped gently against the cabin windows, and Zoe studied beside the fire, Jan sat at her desk, organizing file folders, receipts, title documents. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unfamiliar email address, subject, Invitation to Town Redevelopment Committee, Bozeman Planning Council. We'd like your input as a new local property stakeholder. Join us to discuss upcoming zoning proposals. She read it twice, then once more. The wind howled outside, but inside Cutler's Corner it was warm. The kind of warmth that came not just from radiators or brewed coffee, but from presence, from people who remembered when things were different and appreciated that someone had taken the time to make them better. Jan stood just inside the front door, gloved hands brushing off snow, watching Rudy polish the edge of the front counter with a rag he'd used since the early 90s. The new booths glowed under amber pendant lights, thick, cushioned seats built to stay warm through Montana's brutal winters. A framed sign above the coffee station read pre-refills for veterans and seniors. Ask for a Cutler's cup. The town noticed. They noticed when the floors were redone, when the lighting stopped flickering, when the bathrooms stopped smelling like gasoline and regret, and most of all they noticed when the big chains didn't get their hands on the property. Cutler's Corner, the sign out front now read in metal on wood. No logos, just permanence. Rudy ran it like a ship, quiet, proud, efficient. People listened when he spoke now, like they finally saw the years he'd carried this place on his back. Jan came in every morning, sat by the window with her mug, and nodded to every driver who pulled in with frost on their beard and fatigue in their eyes. Zoe helped on weekends, filling in at the register or restocking the new snack shelves. Jan never asked her to. She just showed up. Feels like a place that sees people, Zoe said one afternoon, pressing her palms to the warm countertop. It didn't before. Jan just nodded. That was the point. Meanwhile, across town, Connor tried launching something he called a real estate rebranding consultancy, mostly buzzwords and recycled Zillow jargon. He printed glossy pamphlets, hosted a webinar no one watched, and bragged online about market leverage and second-act equity strategies. The LLC folded in 3 weeks. Melanie didn't fare better. Word spread fast about the discrepancies in their previous home listing. The local licensing board opened an investigation. Then came the suspension, 3 months minimum, for falsified disclosures and a flagged tax discrepancy she couldn't explain away with a smirk and a blazer. They'd built their house of cards on borrowed confidence. Now it lay scattered damp from the snow. Jan didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her victory was tangible. Bricks, deeds, paper trails. No hashtags. Just legacy. One Friday afternoon, Zoe bounded into the cabin, cheeks flushed with cold envelope in hand. They picked me, she said breathlessly. Bozeman Community Foundation, full tuition for the Urban Development Program. And they want to publish my essay. Jan took the envelope carefully, her eyes sweeping the first few lines, then the signature at the bottom. I'm proud of you, she said, then handed it back with a quiet smile. The LLC will cover your books and living expenses. Consider it a shareholder dividend. Zoe blinked. Are you serious? You've earned it, and it's a good investment. Just don't sell me out to corporate. They both laughed. That night Jan sat at her desk beneath the lamp, reviewing grant forms, zoning permit updates, and the next supply order for the station's winter drive-through window. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustling of pine branches outside the window. Her phone buzzed. Kira Tran, you ready to transfer the cabin too? Jan stared at the message. The cabin had been her anchor, her only proof that something still belonged to her when everything else was taken. hand-hewn by Tom, insulated with years of memories, but the world had shifted. And Jan had learned something. Ownership didn't mean stagnation. It meant control, direction, and trust. The pen didn't shake this time either. Jan sat across from Kira in the quiet of the downtown office, the blinds half drawn against the afternoon glare bouncing off Main Street's frozen sidewalk. Outside, life moved on, snowplows scraping past, engines growling through slush, but in this room, the only sound was ink sliding across paper. "This makes it official," Kira said, tapping the corner of the trust document. "Your original property, the cabin, the acreage, the mineral rights, all transferred into the trust, per your conditions." Jan nodded once. "Steady. And the exclusions? Crystal clear. Connor and Melanie are removed as legal heirs. They're not named. They're not entitled." And she added, sliding over a final page, "This clause ensures they can't contest it without forfeiting any standing elsewhere." The paragraph was short, written in precise legal language. "Any named party who files contestation shall be disqualified from all benefits, current or future, associated with the estate or trust." Jan read it twice, then signed. Kira leaned back with a small smile. "That's one hell of a boundary, Jan. I spent my life holding everyone else's lines," Jan replied, capping the pen. "Time I drew mine in permanent ink." She didn't wait for celebration. The moment wasn't one for confetti or champagne. It was the quiet click of a lock turning, the sound of ownership, cemented. Later that evening, the sky cast a blue hush over Bozeman's hills, and Jan returned to Cutler's Corner just after closing. Rudy was wiping down the countertop, humming under his breath. "Got something for you," he said, reaching under the register. "Been meaning to give it once all the dust settled." He handed her a folded navy apron, crisp and still smelling faintly of starch. White lettering had been stitched along the hem by someone with a steady hand. "Owner founder. Survivor." Jan unfolded it slowly, running her fingers across the fabric. "You sure you don't want to be wearing this?" she asked. Rudy chuckled, shaking his head. "I ran it for years. You built it. From the ashes no less." She didn't cry, but she felt something move in her chest, quiet, fierce, and overdue. She wore the apron on her walk home, boots crunching through fresh powder, cheeks flushed, heart still. The cabin lights glowed like they always had, warm against the dusk, but now it wasn't just shelter, it was legacy. On her terms. Zoe was already inside, working on college forms at the kitchen table. She looked up and grinned when she saw the apron. "About time," she said. Jan poured herself a cup of tea and reached for the small leather-bound journal beside the fruit bowl. She opened to the first page, dated it, and wrote in firm script, "Chapter 1, The Stop That Froze Everything." Then she paused, and kept going. 2 days later, Bozeman PD called Kira. A neighbor had reported activity at the Mountain Ridge property. The house Jan now held under LLC ownership. "Figured the sale fell through," the officer said, voice crackling through speakerphone, "but the son's been coming by. Says he's just finishing the move out. Left some clothes, food in the fridge." Kira looked at Jan. "He doesn't realize it's not his anymore," Jan said flatly. "He's squatting," Kira confirmed. "We'll move fast on this." Quietly but fast. Jan didn't answer right away. She just pulled out a manila folder marked Property Ridge, opened it and reviewed the ownership documents one more time. Every line of ink, every signature, every date, clean. They'd built dreams on ground that never belonged to them. She'd carved truth into deeds they thought were invisible. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snowbanks like twisted holiday decorations. Jan sat in her truck, engine idling low, windshield wipers ticking slow and steady. She parked just across from the Mountain Ridge house, the one with the navy shutters, oversized porch, and the lie of permanence stretched across its siding. Her thermos sat untouched in the cup holder. She wasn't here for coffee. The deputy stepped onto the porch, clipboard in hand, his breath clouding the frozen morning air. Connor answered the door in sweatpants and a thermal undershirt, hair disheveled, eyes bleary. The conversation was brief. Connor's voice raised first, hands gesturing sharp and erratic. Jan couldn't hear him from across the street, but she didn't need to. She'd lived through that pitch before, desperation dressed in entitlement, that frantic edge of someone who thought volume could erase signatures. Then the second officer stepped up beside the first, and Connor's arms dropped. Moments later, he stepped outside. No jacket, no shoes, just the realization settling in that this house, the dream house, the trophy property, was gone. Melanie sat in the passenger seat of their Subaru, engine running, face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, and a trembling hand. Even from a distance, Jan could see the sobs racking her shoulders. Her breath fogged the passenger side window in frantic bursts. A photographer from the local paper crouched low across the street, snapping frame after frame with mechanical indifference. Jan didn't look away. She watched as Connor was walked down the driveway, not handcuffed, but surrounded by the unspoken weight of finality. A box of belongings tucked under one arm, the other clenched at his side. The door locked behind him with a soft click that reverberated louder than any scream. Jan didn't move until the officers were back in their cruiser. Only then did she roll her window down. The cold hit her face like a slap, but it didn't sting, not like it used to. From the passenger seat, Zoe let out a long breath. "I never thought I'd see karma this literal." Jan cracked a smile, slow and quiet. "I didn't either." She watched as Connor opened the car door and climbed in without speaking. Melanie turned away from the window, hiding her face in her hands. The car didn't pull off right away. They just sat there, frozen in place, as if the weight of failure had glued their tires to the road. But Jan added, "I'm warm now." She rolled the window back up. They drove away moments later. Slow, unsure. Not a destination, just a retreat. Later that day, Kira called to confirm everything. "All filings are airtight. County signed off." "Police followed the book to the letter," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "He can't sue. She can't appeal. It's done." Jan had already filed the final title transfer into the LLC's permanent holdings. That house was now listed for lease, corporate tenant only. No showings. No calls from Connor or anyone remotely related. Control. Quiet. Absolute. That evening, Jan sat on the cabin porch with Zoe, the stars crisp above, and the fire pit crackling in front of them. Snow still clung to the pines, but the wind had calmed. It was the kind of winter night that made Bozeman feel like a snow globe, still preserved, somehow sacred. Zoe passed her a fresh mug of cider and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Jan sipped slowly, the heat spreading down her throat. "I regret thinking they'd come back for me that night." She stared into the fire for a long moment, "but not what I did after." They sat in silence as the fire popped. Then Jan's phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered, cautious. "Miss Cutler," the voice said. "This is Mary at the Bozeman Times. We'd like to do a piece on the station and on you. The town's been talking. I think it's time the whole story was told." Jan leaned back in her chair, gaze fixed on the flames. After a long pause, she replied, "Then I suppose it's time someone told it right." The recorder clicked on, and Jan stared straight into the eyes of the young reporter seated across from her. No notepad, no tablet, just a mic, a steaming cup of cocoa, and a heart that clearly wasn't there to mock. "This isn't a puff piece," Mary said, voice gentle but clear. "It's your story. Unfiltered." Jan nodded once. "Slow. Then start with the gas station." They sat inside Cutler's Corner, early before opening. Snow blew sideways, outside, a soft roar against the paneled windows. The booth sat empty, freshly wiped. Rudy was already in the back, prepping coffee. The smell of cinnamon rolls baking drifted in like memory. Mary leaned in. "Why didn't you say anything when they left you?" Jan's face remained still. "Because silence teaches better than shouting." She talked in measured, uncluttered sentences, about that winter night, about the cold, about the weight of waiting, and how she'd made the call to buy, not retaliate, but reclaim, piece by piece. They thought I was just fading. A burden, something to drop off and forget. Her eyes flicked to the window. But they forgot whose name was on the land. Mary said nothing. Just let the silence sit. Then she asked, "And now?" Jan smiled faintly. "Now I don't have to raise my voice to be heard." The article ran a week later. Front page. They left her in the cold. She bought the town. Below the headline, a full-color photo captured Jan standing next to Pump 3, snowflakes in her silver hair, scarf tucked tight, expression unreadable. Her posture was upright, her eyes direct, the kind of picture that made people stop mid-scroll and read every word. It traveled fast. Not just Bozeman, Helena, Missoula. Then across state lines. The story of the gas station widow who bought back her life, who took the cold they handed her and turned it into a hearthstone. Sales at Cutler's Corner tripled by the end of the month. Truckers stopped just to shake Rudy's hand. Locals brought pies, postcards, little thank you notes folded into $20 bills. Some just came to sit. So Jan installed a bench out front, beneath the old pump sign, wide enough for two, bolted into concrete. She added a plaque, the comeback seat, for anyone they left behind. Zoe started working after school shifts, mostly register, sometimes stocking. She wore a denim apron with a stitched patch. Rudy made himself, next in line. She didn't brag. But when classmates came in, they treated her different, like they'd just learned her grandmother ran a kingdom made of patience and asphalt. One day Jan caught Zoe standing by the bench, gloved hand brushing the plaque gently. "What are you thinking?" Jan asked. Zoe smiled without turning. That they never even knew who they left behind. Jan reached into her coat, pulled out a folded clipping of the article, Zoe's picture taped next to hers, right below the fold. They do now, but not everyone took it gracefully. 3 days after the article went national, a legal notice was delivered by courier to Kira's office. Plaintiff, Melanie Cutler claim, defamation, character damage, malicious interference with future employment. Kira barely skimmed it before scoffing. Filed in the wrong jurisdiction. No factual basis. She claims emotional harm because you let people think things without correcting them. That's not law. That's bitterness in paperwork form. Jan didn't even blink. The court dismissed the claim in under a week. It started with a balance check. Jan sat at the corner booth of Cutler's Corner, snow melting from her boots and steam curling from her coffee. Across the table, a bank representative tapped delicately on her laptop, the screen's glow reflecting off her glasses. "So just to confirm," the woman said, her voice hushed, "you're the only primary on the account. This is legally designated as a discretionary family fund, but it's not a joint access. Your name's the only signature that matters." Jan didn't smile. She just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Then I'd like to remove all connected cards, terminate shared privileges, and issue a freeze. Immediate effect." The woman hesitated, then leaned forward. "You're aware this will cut off." "I'm aware of what they assumed," Jan said, cool and precise. "And I'm correcting the assumption." Within minutes it was done. The fund Tom had set up years ago, meant for medical emergencies and family support, had become something Connor dipped into when cash flow was tight, and Melanie used as a safety net for spa visits, club fees and business lunches that led nowhere. That net was now a steel trap, and she'd just sprung it. Later that day, across town at Bozeman Market, Melanie stood in line behind 2 retirees and a teenage couple holding energy drinks. Her cart was filled with cheese trays, imported olives, and a discounted floral arrangement. She swiped the card, declined. The clerk offered a polite, forced smile. "Want to try again?" Melanie frowned, leaned in, and lowered her voice. "It's a business card. Just try it again." Second swipe. Declined. Behind her a phone began filming. The clerk handed the card back. "Still pleasant. Might be an authorization issue. Do you want to call your bank?" Melanie stood frozen for a beat too long, mouth working for a comeback that wouldn't come. She left the cart and walked out stiffly, not looking back. Someone behind her chuckled. By the time she reached the parking lot, her phone had 3 missed calls from Connor, and a news alert about Cutler's Corner being added to the top 5 must-stop spots in Montana. Zoe moved into Jan's cabin full-time the same week. She came with more books, a stronger coat, and a sense of belonging that wrapped around her shoulders like the knit blanket Jan folded over the guest bed. "You sure this isn't weird?" Zoe asked, brushing snow off her duffel. "What's weird?" Jan said, handing her a mug of cider. "Is thinking loyalty expires with convenience." Zoe grinned. "You should put that on a mug." Jan raised her brow. "Trademark pending." They shared a laugh, but the truth in it was sharp beneath the warmth. That night, Jan added a new clause to the trust. Kira reviewed it the next morning, her brow arching slightly as she read the typed lines. "Any individual who demonstrably abandons the grantor, physically, financially, or by legal means, shall be deemed ineligible for any current or future portion of the estate. This clause is non-contestable." "Well," Kira said, clicking her pen shut. "That'll hold." Jan reached for the signature page. Kira stopped her gently. "One last thing." From her briefcase, she pulled out a small velvet-lined box. Inside, a sleek black pen with silver inlay. Engraved in cursive along the barrel were the words, "Sign only for yourself now." Jan held it like a weapon. Or maybe an heirloom. "No more shared lines," she murmured. Kira smiled. "Only solid ones." The next morning, Jan opened the shop early. A fine sheet of snow glittered on the pumps, untouched. Rudy was late. Mild stomach bug, nothing serious, but Jan didn't mind. She liked the solitude before sunrise. She flipped the open sign, refilled the napkin dispensers, and was just wiping down the front counter when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Out of state. She almost ignored it until the voicemail icon popped up. Curious, she played it. A smooth, practiced voice spilled through the speaker. "Hi, Miss Cutler. This is Eric Klein, with Rocky Range Tours. We recently saw your story and your station. We'd love to speak about a potential feature site on our Yellowstone to Glacier route. We're prepared to make a formal offer." The booth was walnut-stained and hand-polished, with navy blue cushions and brass trim along the base. Jan had designed it herself. Simple, timeless. One side faced the window where the morning sun painted everything gold, the other backed against the wall beneath a framed photo of Tom in uniform, laughing mid-sentence, his eyes caught somewhere between war and home. A small bronze plaque sat beneath the photo. "In memory of Thomas Cutler, husband, farmer. Every gallon earned." Jan didn't tell anyone the first day she installed it. She just showed up at 5 a.m., slid the new table into place with Rudy's help, and brewed the strongest pot of coffee she'd made all year. By 8 a.m., someone had left a folded thank you card on the booth seat. By noon it held 3 flower bundles, a cup of quarters for coffee, and a note written in shaky cursive. "Sat here with my dad every Sunday. Thank you for bringing him back." Jan said nothing, but every time she passed the table, she brushed her fingers across the wood, like a memory she didn't want to wear out by speaking. It didn't take long before people started asking, "Can I sit there for just a minute? Do you think Tom would have minded me sipping my cocoa here? Is this the comeback seat I read about?" Zoe, now a part-time employee, with a schedule laminated and posted by the back sink, took it all in stride. On Wednesdays, her granddaughter's shift, she wore a pin that read Cutler, Jr. and kept the booth clean like it was sacred. "Some kid left a Lego guy on it," she told Jan one night. "Said Tom would have liked it." "He probably would have," Jan murmured. Zoe had become the heart of the place without even realizing it. Locals lit up when she poured their coffee. Teens asked her advice on college forms. Elderly couples brought her cookies, recipes, and unsolicited wisdom about love. "Feels like a second town inside a town," Zoe said once, watching the booths fill up. "Except this one keeps its promises." That fall, a teacher from Bozeman High emailed Jan, "Your story's now in our civics unit, under local power, property rights and advocacy. We had 4 students choose you for their presentation topic." Jan had stared at the email for a full minute before replying, simply, "Tell them I stayed because I still believed in home." Later that month, she stood at a podium outside Kira's new firm, the sign behind them freshly painted Tran and Associates, Real Property and Legacy Law. Balloons danced in the cold wind, and the mayor gave a rambling speech about tenacity and snow boots. Kira handed Jan the oversized scissors. "Cut it for me." "You sure?" Jan asked. "You taught me what a legacy looks like when someone claims it." The ribbon fluttered to the ground. The camera shutters clapped like applause. Back at Cutler's Corner, Rudy was cleaning the grill one final time. He wore his old flannel and a ball cap Zoe had embroidered with OG Station King. He'd finally decided to retire after a half-century of standing behind a register that rarely said thank you. "Never thought I'd leave on a high note," he said as Jan poured him a bourbon from the bottle hidden in the breakroom cabinet. "But if you're gonna go out, might as well be from a place that learned how to breathe again." That night they threw him a surprise party. Pies lined the counters. Someone played a guitar. Zoe gave a toast. Rudy cried into his bourbon. Jan didn't cry, but she stood a little taller. The next morning a thick envelope arrived in the mail, stamped with the Montana Department of Heritage. Inside, an official document. Gold seal, blue ribbon, Cutler's Corner designated local heritage site. Effective immediately. The world was still blue with early morning when Jan stepped out of her truck, boots crunching against packed snow, her breath rising in slow white ribbons. The sky hadn't yet broken open with sun, and the air was sharp enough to sting the nose, clean enough to feel honest. She held the keys in one gloved hand, the original set, the ones Tom had kept on a brass ring with the old station tag still attached. Her fingers curled around them as she approached the front doors of Cutler's Corner. The windows were already glowing, faint and warm. Zoe's silhouette moved inside, pulling filters, wiping down counters. The girl didn't need a manager. She moved like someone who'd inherited more than a paycheck. Jan reached for the door and paused. For a second she let the moment breathe, let the stillness speak. She turned the key. The lock clicked open with the kind of finality that didn't mean an ending, but arrival. Inside, the hum of the heaters greeted her. The smell of ground beans and cinnamon. A soft country playlist drifted from the overhead speakers. Zoe glanced up and grinned as she poured hot water into the press. "You're early." Jan set her bag behind the register. "So are you." "Couldn't sleep. Felt like something was happening today." Jan gave a small knowing smile. "Something is." She walked over to the front door and flipped the sign to open. A simple action, but the weight of it pressed against her chest in the best way. This place, once cold, forgotten, abandoned by everyone but Rudy, now buzzed with life. Outside, snow fell gently, dusting the roof and lampposts. By the time the first customer walked in, a delivery driver with cracked hands and a tired smile, Jan was already at the counter handing him a Cutler's cup. "First one's always on the house," she said. He nodded. "I've been on the road all night. This place feels like a pause button." "It's meant to," Zoe added. Over by the window booth, the one with the plaque, someone had already left a bundle of dried lavender and a small wooden truck carved by hand. Jan brushed snow off the table, then gently straightened the photo above it. The photo of herself, caught mid-blizzard, scarf tight around her neck, face lined with frost and fire. Below it, carved into a blackwood frame, "Never again left behind." Zoe joined her, sipping from a chipped mug. "Think it'll ever slow down again?" Jan shook her head. "Not if we're doing it right." Across town, a different morning unfolded. Connor slammed the door of his dented car and turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The engine wheezed, coughed, then died. He hit the wheel hard enough to sting his palm and muttered curses that disappeared into cold air. Melanie sat on the curb a few feet away, phone in hand, scrolling. "Anyone answer yet?" he asked. She didn't look up. "You think they want to help us?" He looked toward the shuttered building behind them, the one they'd tried to flip, failed to hold, and now had no claim to. A realtor's fresh flyer was stapled to the post outside. Melanie's eyes landed on it, and she froze. "Is that?" she whispered. New listing, former Cutler residence, now approved for nonprofit youth shelter development. Connor turned away. You've got to be kidding. Melanie stared at it for a long moment, then closed her phone, pocketed it and said quietly, maybe it's for the best. Neither of them noticed that, across town, a line had begun forming at the station, locals with thermoses, out-of-towners with questions, a couple with a camera crew. Back inside Cutler's corner, Yan handed off the morning register to Zoe and moved toward the door. She paused again, just for a second, and took it all in. The booths, the smell, the girl behind the counter who called her family without asking for anything back. She touched the keys on her belt loop one last time. The brass tag winked in the light. They left me in the cold, but I bought the fire and lit it just for myself.